I don't know how many times I can say thank you for your time, but really thank you so much for being available.
You're welcome. You're
Cool.
welcome.
So,
Yeah.
Inge,
So,
tell us a bit. Who are you?
yeah, so I am by education a forester who specialized in forest ecology. And then I took my PhD also in forest ecology, but especially focused on bioenergy and nutrient cycling and soil fertility. But then as things has developed, I've broadened up also to work on carbon issues in forestry and also on governance, so meaning forest certification and regulation, sustainable forest management more broadly. So that's my background, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen.
And my amazing supervisor from my thesis. In your professional opinion, why is forestry so important?
Because of all the criteria you have in the sustainable forest management standards. They will talk about biodiversity, they will talk about soils and functioning of soils, they will talk about products that we get, the timber, and it can be berries and mushrooms, all kinds of other products. It can be cultural values, it can be jobs, it can be water quality, and it can be the whole water cycling system that it supports as well. So it's important, really important for a lot of things that we value.
Definitely. Why are forests so important to mitigate climate change?
Well, forests are part of the global carbon cycle, and that's why they are important also because they are exchanging carbon with the atmosphere. So, what they can do, like almost nothing else, is that they can actually take carbon out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis and incorporate it into the wood and the biomass of the trees. And that's why one reason that it's so important, it can remove carbon from the atmosphere. And then also we can produce wood that we can use for materials. We can use it for as a fuel. And that's important because then we can substitute fossil fuels or materials that require a lot of fossil fuels to produce. That means we can save some of the fossil fuels because those, if once you've released the carbon from these fossil storages, they are not going back to those storages again. They will stay in the atmosphere, in the balance between the atmosphere or the equilibrium between the atmosphere and the terrestrial ecosystems and the oceans. So, and when once it's in that system, it's basically impossible to get it out again. Of course, there is this carbon capture and storage, but that's still not very well developed. So forest is basically one of the most efficient technologies we have right now for removing carbon from the atmosphere.
Perfect, perfect. But Inga, I know that also among foresters, there's this huge discussion between like, does old unmanaged forests actually help in climate change? Do we actually have to transition all of our forests to actually be a managed forest? So, through your research, what have you found out about this topic? Do old unmanaged forests actually help mitigate climate change or not?
Well, I would say it depends, but we can discuss them. What are the mechanisms? If you have an unmanaged forest, of course, it still takes up carbon from the atmosphere because the trees are alive and they have photosynthesis. But at the same time, in an unmanaged forest, when the trees grow old, they die and fall to the ground and become dead wood, which is then decomposed. And through the decomposition, the carbon is released back to the atmosphere. Maybe a small part is incorporated into the soil, but so far investigations show that it's probably not a big amount, so it's not something that will solve the problems overnight. So if you have a forest that's maybe been unmanaged for a long period of time, you can think of it as steady state, where the trees take up just as much carbon as all the dead wood released back to the atmosphere. And of course, that's an idealized situation. That's not what happens in reality because no forest is ever in a perfect steady state. But if you look at it at a landscape level where you have trees that die off and new growth from new trees, then probably this assumption is not totally unrealistic. Then you can of course have natural disturbances like spruce bloodworm attacks or fires or wind throws might cause some instant release of carbon that is then, and then after that you get a period with a net sequestration. So you have these interactions all the time, or fluctuations all the time in these unmanaged forests. If you have a managed forest, you could say the trees and the wood it's not dying off, it's removed, And then to some extent, it's incorporated into products, like for construction. It's inside, and it's not getting wet, so it can last for many hundreds of years sometimes. Other products like paper, of course, do not have a long lifetime, so they are not as useful as furniture or construction and buildings in that sense. If you use them instead of using steel or aluminum or fossil fuels, and if you can save fossil fuels by using wood, you still have a gain. There is something about the timing question that people are thinking much about. If we have some good renewable alternative technologies in a few years, then we should not build big power plants that are reliant on biomass for the next 20 years, because if we in 5 years have a better technology, we should invest in that and develop that instead. So that's maybe the critical issue, and what you can discuss and disagree about, because there is not really a perfect answer to that question. It depends on how optimistic you maybe how
Definitely.
optimistic you are with regard to how fast technologies will develop. And I think we've seen different things in history. Sometimes technologies develop much faster than we think, and sometimes they develop much slower.
Yeah,
There are
exactly.
like authors in the 30s writing that in the future we will never use wood for energy purposes, but here we are more than 100 years later maybe, and we're still using wood for energy. So we haven't really solved the problem totally, so that we can stay without wood for energy.
Exactly. But Inge, we as foresters, we always like discuss what are the use of forestry for management. My master thesis, for example, was in forest
Yes.
and nature management. But
Yes.
should we always use forest, for example, to manage it and help to mitigate climate change? For example, isn't there other sustainable ways that we can manage the forest?
Yeah, you can say that it's human beings who decides what it should be managed for. And then you can say, once you've decided what it should be managed for, you can work to sustain or maintain or preserve those values. And of course, if we look at forestry today, normally it's not really managed, also not for climate mitigation. Usually it's managed for timber production and things that have economic outcomes. But in most places today, there is a very high level of awareness that there are also other values in the forest, like biodiversity. In some places, protection of water quality is very important. Like in Denmark, on the most forest and land in Denmark, you have water interests. It can be recreation, it can be cultural values, and you may want to decide here it's not timber production, here it's not climate change mitigation that is the most important. It's biodiversity then. And some forests, if you want to manage them for biodiversity, they might require more variation and more open structures in some places, and that means that you remove trees maybe, and you don't have as much carbon as you would have if you tried to optimize the carbon storage there. So there can be a trade-off there, but it's probably dependent also on the site if you have synergies or trade-off.
Definitely. Like every forest has a purpose.
Yeah, I think everybody agrees that it's important to set aside a certain proportion of the forest area for the natural processes to play out. It's our reference also, that we do know what does it look like.
Exactly, like an untouched reference forest is as important as the other plots to actually be able to do research.
Yeah, that's true. It depends also on the history. Like Denmark, we already destroyed and cut down all our forests 200 years ago when people were not as aware. So you could say we don't really have the same value in unmanaged forest as you have in Brazil, for example. So I would also say that there's a huge difference when you talk about unmanaged forest and the values that it has. I mean, the biodiversity levels in Brazil are just way higher than they are here in Denmark, for example. So there are huge differences there in how you should maybe look upon that in a global perspective, especially.
Yeah, definitely. Like every forest has a purpose. But Inge, a very important thing that I wanted to ask, like how can society make sure that forests like help mitigate climate change? Like what is the role that policy and governance can play in all these things?
Yeah, what you can do is, now we were talking about sustainable forest management and managing the forest for a certain purpose. So you can have public policies that address the management of the forest and what values it should be managed for, the public forest, but also rules for private forest owners. So you can try to steer sort of where you want the management to go. And that's what's happening in forest policies in all countries. And then, of course, there's also the question about implementation of that policy and enforcement and everything, which can be challenging.
Yes.
But yes,
In a
it
word,
can.
challenging.
Yes. But still, that's the way society can try to support sustainable forest management, and not only forest policies. It can also be like energy policies. Like the European Union have now introduced sustainability criteria, so you can only use biomass if it fulfills certain criteria. It must be legal. You must not harm biodiversity. You must maintain site fertility, and so on and so forth, and carbon as well, carbon stocks.
Mhm.
So that's what policy can do. There are also public procurement policies, so that when there are public construction work going on, they can make sure that they only buy, for example, certified wood,
Mhm.
so that you have some level of control or auditing of how it's been produced according to certain standards.
Mhm. But Inga, you just said like sometimes people search for like a certificate in order to buy like certified wood, certified
Yeah,
sustainable wood. I've
yeah,
searched a lot and I found out that IKEA has a lot of different certificates. But there's some documentaries done that shows that IKEA is actually bad because it has low quality products. Like, I don't know if you have more information about IKEA, but like I was very happy buying their products because I was thinking, oh, they are managing their forests in a way that is sustainable, is not affecting the soil productivity, soil
yeah,
fertility.
yeah.
What do you think about that? Is IKEA good or bad?
Well, it's maybe hard to say. You could say what we've all loved about IKEA is that they had well-designed products. It's a Swedish brand, so it's a country that has a lot of produces a lot of wood, and it has a big wood industry. So there was a lot of wood in those furniture. It's a feel-good thing also that we like this wooden furniture, and the design was really nice. It was also a policy should be cheap and accessible for people. So it also means that not only rich people had access to good designs, also other people like normal people like us.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as things has developed, you could say because it had to be cheaper, the quality was maybe not the highest, and also the durability of those products were not the highest. So those furniture are maybe not as durable as if you buy really expensive furniture that has been processed and made in a more solid way. So from that point of view, you could say if you increase the consumption, you also kind of increase the whole use of energy in society. So in that sense, it's bad. But they might be aware that they need to change policies to more long-lived products. I think they might be aware that this is sort of where the public opinion is moving.
But like I have products from them that I actually really like. Like they seem very durable. Like I bought them for like 6 months, but they are like completely polished, like just as new.
I also have, I have IKEA furniture that I had 30 years, and I can
You
probably have
see?
them 30 years more. So it's also a matter of who you are.
And
How
what you
often you want
buy.
to change your stuff.
Mm.
That's a personal choice. So
Yes.
I maybe I bought a sofa once that actually did break, and I had
Mm-hmm.
to buy a new one. But I also have IKEA things that I've had for decades. So, but I think all wood they use is might be certified. I think at least a large proportion of it is certified. Maybe all, maybe I don't know what's exactly the policy. So from that point of view, if it's FSC certified, it does the wood has been produced under standards that are quite high. So I think that's still positive. And then it's a totally different issue how long lived the products are. That's another sits in another space, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
But the wood itself has been produced in a responsible way. Yeah.
Perfect. That makes total sense. So, Inga, for example, these products from IKEA, as we were saying before, they are wood products that also store carbon. Carbon that we're taking out of the
Yeah.
atmosphere in order to store it so we have less effects of climate change. But
Yeah.
why is really forest carbon as a research important?
Well, that's because we want to know also what are the processes in the forest, how does the carbon cycle in the forest, and if we know how the carbon cycle works, we can also better predict what is our impact when we harvest the wood or when we manage the forest for other purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So we can know what happens to the carbon then. So that's a reason to do research, and also to see, can we maybe store more carbon if we manage some things differently, and what's the overall benefit of the whole supply chain of the wood if we manage the forest like this or like that. So that's what research can help to provide answers to questions about what's most beneficial, because it's quite a complex system if you think about the forest itself and harvesting it and removing the wood from the forest and processing it and then getting it to its final end use, and you have all the waste streams and you have the main products. And so it's a complex system, and research is also, it's a tool that you can try to use to deal with that complexity.
Definitely. And like I just wanted to add one thing, because like the master thesis that we did together was also use carbon as an indicator to understand the effects of harvesting systems in the forest itself. How well was the forest recovering? So this was also used to represent how much carbon there were in the forest after a while, to see how much was the effect of carbon storage. But you can also check other things, such as how were the effects of harvesting.
Yes. Of the intensity of the harvesting. If you remove the
Yes.
residues or not, for example, that's what you
Exactly.
were looking at. Yes.
Perfect. And Inga, this is a very, very important question that it was one of the questions that I'm most excited about. But like, how other citizens that do not work directly with forests can help keep forests protected and sustainably managed?
And I think there are actually quite a few options. Of course, already being interested in it is the first. Awareness is the first thing you need to do anything. Then you need to be aware of what a forest is, how it works. So I would say go out and enjoy the forest, have a look at it so that you get a sense of what the forest is. That's maybe a really important thing to do, except that you should stay away from the areas that are protected, because animals need peace from human beings, of course. Don't go there, just leave them alone. But in other parts, just to get a sense of what the forest is, to try to understand what a forest is.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we talked about public policies before. So you can vote for the politicians that you feel do most to protect the forest according to the valid values that you believe are the right ones. And not only protection, but also the management of the forest. What are the policies? We should also mention land use change. I mean, do they allow deforestation? Do they have policies that allow deforestation, for example? Or do they have policies for afforestation, reforestation? So you can vote for the politicians that you feel have the best values in that sense. You can also sometimes the whole democratic system also gives you other opportunities to participate. There might be hearings, public hearings, where you can give your opinion about certain policies before they are actually decided, and then you might influence them also. And you can do that through your organization. Sometimes you can also do it as an individual, but it's maybe more common that you can do it through organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you can do as well. Look for organizations that are in agreement with your values and then support them. And that's maybe also where I would like to ask you to be precautious, because there are also organizations that maybe appear to have very good values, but sometimes they're not always built on sound science, and sometimes they do not really have a holistic view on things. So they might want to focus especially on one thing and want it all over the place, but that's not possible. So maybe also select with carefulness, but it's always good to engage with organizations that can help you promote your views, I think, because together you're stronger. And then we talked about buying sustainable wood products
Yes.
that they're legal. There are different legislations that will ensure that or at least minimize the risk that products are illegal, and they can be certified according to standards, and those standards are public, so you can see what it means when it's certified according to a certain standard. So you can go for those products. And then we talked about Ikea and consumption, so you can reduce your general consumption.
Perfect.
Because all the consumption we have, if we should replace that with wood, that's probably also not possible. We should probably think about reducing our whole consumption and changing our style of living.
Definitely. Like we don't like wood actually is so durable. It can last, as you said, Inga, for hundreds of years. So why we need to buy all the time more? We don't need it.
Yeah. Much of what we buy, we don't need it, I think. So think a little bit more, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't look too nice, something a little bit older, but if it works, why would you throw it out?
I agree 100%. And I wanted to also make an addition to what we were saying. So that's why in our project we also have videos showing ecotourism trips so people can do to actually help forest. Like if you go to a park and actually pay for the entrance of the park, you can help preserve all the forest. So also we make videos about consumption, like makeup, clothing, everything. Like if we are conscious about everything that we do, we are able to help preserve nature and our forests in a better way. Right.
So I think if forest, and of course, I think also that's kind of saying it from a more rational point of view. But I think if we try to think with our emotions, then we all like forest, I think. So somehow intuitively, we just know that they are important.
Definitely. I agree.
Yeah.
And also, like, as you were saying, like, to maintain the livelihood of the people that depend on it, also the animals that live there, and
Yeah.
also us that we are directly affected by it, even if we don't see it.
Yes, I think we do benefit just from knowing that they're there, even if we're not in them all the time.
Exactly.
Yes.
I would like to, but I'm
yes, it's not possible for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Inge, I think that was all the questions I wanted to ask. Do you want to add anything else?
I think I've said everything that I thought I would say. So thanks for asking me these nice questions and interviewing me.
Of course, like I was so happy that you had time for this. Like I think it's super important that we spread the word. Even if you're not working with it, you are related to it and can help in various ways.
I think so. I think most people can relate to forests.
Definitely. Inge,
Yes.
thank you so much for your time. I was
You're
so happy
welcome.
with this interview.